Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast. We're coming off last night's State of the Union address. I guess there's always that thing where I guess it's it's always unclear to me whether it's the second or the third, since you have that kind of first State of the Union that a president does that is kind of the housewarming, right? I'm not sure they call it a State of the, do they call it? They don't, right? It's just sort of the kickoff speech or whatever. Um, but I wrote Kate and I in our different sections of the site were both basically live blogging the events last night, and I did a kind of a sum up afterwards. I found it. I always am a little trepidatious about being too gushy. And as I said in what I wrote last night, I don't like watching State of the Union addresses. I find them like a mix of tedious and stressful because what's going to happen, is there going to be this, if is there going to be that, and in the nature of what I do, I have to kind of analyze it. Was this good? Was that good? And in most cases, they're just kind of like, yeah, what the president said, all the stuff that he says. And, there was this one time where this happened and someone cheered, and was he inspiring enough? And were the sort of the feel good guests up in the box good enough, and all that kind of stuff. And in most cases, it kind of just totally doesn't matter. And by matter, I mean, is it going to change the trajectory of the political moment? Is it going to change the next election? All this kind of stuff. I mean, they tend to kind of. There was, I think, I think it was Kate who showed me a tweet or something, or maybe something from a newsletter, one of the Pod Save America newsletters last night, and one of Obama's speechwriters basically described it as something like, high floor, low ceiling. Like it's a very bounded thing, right? President standing, everybody's got good speechwriters. President stands up there and he reads the speech, and kind of like, as long as he doesn't throw up, I mean, how bad can it be, right? He reads the speech. But it's also, how good can it be? Because he's not going to introduce to you that he just got a PhD in nuclear physics. Who he is. So it's all kind of bounded. And yet last night, I ended up saying, to me, it was the best State of the Union address I've ever seen. And I've been watching them for more than 40 years. And when I say that, I don't mean that as I just said. It's kind of, it's not the highest bar, right? I mean, we know that Bill Clinton sort of notoriously gave these long laundry list speeches that reporters hated. But over the 8 years of his presidency, the press realized that the public liked it. He's just talking about this program, that program, kind of informational and stuff like that. And Barack Obama, obviously a great orator, but at a certain level, kind of like, okay, the president's a great orator. That has a limited. That's cool, um, but that has a limited relevance to being president. Um, Trump was Trump, Bush was Bush in their own ways. But in any case, I went into this one, you know, uh, not really high expectations or low expectations. Joe Biden has never been like a great orator. As many of you know, when he was a child, he actually had a stutter, and there's still some kind of remnants of that in his speech. Uh, and to me, at least, the first, I don't know, 15 minutes or so was pretty perfunctory, even a little halting. And if you're a Biden fan, as I am, there's always this kind of sense if anything's halting, everybody's going to say, "Oh my God, he's losing it. He's totally he's had it. He's got dementia and all this kind of stuff." So it's always a kind of watching it to see how it goes and everything. And but then it kind of changed. And he was enjoying himself. He really, I mean, it kind of, you saw that afterwards. Kate and I were just talking before we started recording the podcast that we weren't sure. Someone told me that he was there talking to people after the speech for more than an hour. Kate thinks it was not nearly that long, and she's probably right. But the point is, it was much longer than like any other president does. It's kind of like he's closing the bar, right? He's waiting to every last person who wanted to hang out with him and chat. And that's kind of classic Joe Biden. He's that kind of retail politics, backslapping and not that's not all trivial or for show or just kind of collecting chits and all that kind of stuff. He's a people person. That's kind of who he is, and it's an interesting contrast with Barack Obama because Obama had many fine qualities, not least of which was as a communicator and a speaker. But he wasn't a glad hander. He did it because you have to do that, but that wasn't his thing. And it is Joe Biden's thing. But what really, and you probably saw it, so I don't need to describe it to you, but he starts out and it's, unity, unity, unity. What we did together. Thank you so much, Congress people. Even you Republicans, we all got together and we did it. Even though in a lot of cases that was not the case, right? But all kind of like unity, and we're going to do this and we can come together and blah, 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 blah. And then he kind of is sort of setting a trap for them because he's up there, man. We are one big happy family, and we disagree sometime, but like we are all together. And look at what we've accomplished, and thank you because I couldn't have accomplished any. It's your accomplishment. And then he started with these things about like and I just hope you guys don't abolish Social Security because we don't want to do that. And and he sort of they start yelling at him, calling him a liar, jeering, and I mean, for the ones of you who are fairly new to this, that whole thing is totally new. That really started in 2010. I think it was the 2010. I don't know if it was maybe it was 2011 State of the Union address. I can't remember with Obama where Joe Wilson's called him a liar, just yelled out at him, and it was shocking to everybody. Everybody was like totally taken aback. But now it's like normal for Republicans to do that. And he wasn't thrown off his stride at all. He kind of went back and forth with them. And kind of they're saying, Larry's like, no, no, no. Hey, call my office. I'll show you Rick Scott's program. I'm sorry you didn't know about it. I'm glad you're having a kind of a State of the Union conversion here. He was clearly enjoying himself, and he was going toe to toe. They didn't throw him off his stride. And if nothing else, that made it kind of one of the best of these that I've seen, just because it was unpredictable. The most telling moments were not scripted; they were off the speech. And I think there's always this sort of thing that partisans get into, and I mean partisans in the positive sense of the word, of the House Republican majority, they want to destroy Biden. So when you see him saying, hey, we're going to work together, I'm loving my friend Kevin, a lot of people are like, dude, he doesn't get it. And that's bad because he's the head of the team. But in a political sense, what you want is you want the president up there saying like, "Hey, we are one big team. We are loving each other, loving America. Everything is awesome." And then you get like Marjorie Greene saying, "Fuck you, liar." And she didn't, as far as we know, she didn't say fuck you, but she was saying stuff without four-letter words, pretty close. Yelling, calling him a liar and stuff, jeering, all this kind of stuff. And you see that as the public and you're like, "Wow, Joe Biden's trying to bring everybody together and these Republicans are whack." And they walked right into it, and they kind of, they could only spring that trap on themselves, and they did. And I think, as I said, I think State of the Unions don't end up mattering that much in the grand scheme of things, but certainly, Joe Biden's big political liability is a lot of people, and not just Republicans, think is he up to it? He's old. He's 80 years old. 80 is old. If you're 80, I'm sorry, you're old. You're probably going to be alive when you're 90, maybe 95, but it's old. We all know a lot of 80-year-olds. It's that's you're not operating. Most people at that age are not operating at the level they were when they were 50 or 60 or even 70. And in some ways, it's actually more of a liability for him with Democrats because, of course, Republicans are saying you know, they've set up a kind of a secret old folks home in the White House, and he's barely, he can barely speak or something like that. They're against him. They're saying all sorts of things. But his real problem is that there are a number of Democrats who like him, thankful that he got the job done in 2020, but they think like, all right, we need someone newer, someone with a little more, a little more current, a little more energy, all that kind of stuff. And Joe Biden's still 80, but I think the Biden you saw there, he's he's got a lot of energy, and he's pretty jazzed there. So I thought the whole thing was different than what I was expecting. And I think they have set themselves up now for a lot of post State of the Union press. Because what are you going to talk about now? We're going to litigate, well, is it true that there are a lot of Republicans who want to cut Social Security? Let's dig into that. And there are a lot of Republicans who want to cut Social Security. So that's a conversation the White House wants to have. So that's where we are. Let me remind you that the Josh Marshall podcast is brought to you by Grady's Cold Brew Iced Coffee. It's brewed strong with a blend of 100% Arabica coffee. I was going to say, I thought it was like Arabica beans, but it's Arabica coffee. I guess this is sort of a style and diction issue, but there you go. Grady's foolproof bean bags take the mess and guesswork out of brewing with rich, velvety coffee you can drink iced, hot, spiked in a cocktail. Just steep overnight and sip to your heart's content. Save yourself a stop, and Grady's any way you want, ready to give it a swirl. Ready to give it a swirl. Wow, I'm really off today. I'm thrown off by the late night. Are you ready to give it a swirl? Get 25% off at Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. That's Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. Okay, co-host Kate Riga, what's your verdict?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think it's the best Biden speech I've ever seen. I thought it was the best State of the Union I've ever seen, which is kind of shocking given that Biden is just really not a good public speaker. And like, I don't, obviously he's got his stutter as part of it. And he, let me just say, is not alone in this. Like, none of the Democratic leaders currently are good speakers. I watched a Schumer presser the other day and like was nodding off. I mean, it's just, it's not a skill that necessarily a lot of our leaders have at this moment. But
I think Hakeem Jeffries is a sort of a comer there. I think he's at it.
I'm holding out until, oh my god, his A to Z thing he did in his speech I thought was so annoying.
Oh,
So
I didn't
I'm
even. I
really,
didn't.
oh,
I
he did
didn't.
like
I didn't see it.
A is for, I don't know. Uh, affability. B is for bipartisanship, and did one for like every
Oh,
letter.
yeah,
This
that's
was
pretty
after
annoying.
the McCarthy speakership thing, so we'd already
Uh,
been there for 8 million freaking hours. But anyway,
yeah.
so and like you say, Biden started off quite shaky. Like his first 5 lines were fumbled in a way that they were almost hard to understand what he was saying. And he tried to open up with a joke about Jill Biden going to the Eagles game, and it was
Yeah, there
indecipherable.
was
So
some,
it was
like,
awkward.
yeah, there was some word missing or something, and I was
Yeah.
like, "Ooh, this might be a long night."
And I do think it's a technique to deal with the stutter that he sometimes speeds through. He goes really fast so he doesn't get stuck on things,
Right,
which sometimes makes him miss words and sometimes it makes it hard to understand the thrust of the sentence, or like deadens how it lands, because
right.
there wasn't an emphasis on the
It's
kind
like
of
the
big
timing
word.
is off. Yeah.
Right. And so at the beginning, I was just like, oh, geez, like this is going to be rough. And, and also this is the first time he's delivering a State of the Union with McCarthy behind him instead of it being Harris and Pelosi. So, and that does change the dynamic, and in ways that I want to get into. But the most basic way is that you have, a kind of a quote unquote hostile actor behind him reacting to his speech. And that makes it feel less safe for him as a speaker. Um, because we've got a live shot, a live reaction shot from someone who does not want him to perform well.
Yep.
So you also had that in the dynamic. But as he also often does, I think you got a real sense of him settling in and kind of building his momentum and building his comfort. And like you talked about, I think it's indisputable that the moment that he quote unquote won the speech and it turned from kind of a success to what I really think was a blow the doors off speech was when, like you say, he used the Republican heckling to publicly negotiate them into backing off of cutting Social Security and Medicare. I mean, it was masterful on so many levels. I think the fact that his ad libbing that in that part was very good and very funny. Like, kind of after he says, like, okay, so we're all on the same page, huh? Like, unanimity, like, all right, everyone's cheering. And then he returns back to the text of the speech, but he throws in these little asides where he's like, I will never allow these programs to be threatened, which apparently is not going to be a problem, and it was
Right.
funny. And like Harris was laughing and McCarthy was kind of laughing. um, he just kind of had it all in the palm of his hand. And I think it was doubly impressive because that is unbelievably stressful to have people yelling at you and people who are in this moment your enemies trying to throw you off your game and being rude. And like you say, I know the conversations about decorum are so boring, but breaking the norms in a way that was unbreakable for a really long time. Like you say, obviously you lie was the first crack in that, but that was a big deal. And
It
both
was a
sides
huge
condemned it.
it was shocking at the
Right.
time. Yeah.
And then, last year you kind of had the big image from last year was Bobert and Marjorie Taylor Greene standing up and mid yelling. So we've had, the cracks are splintering out, but
Mhm.
this year, I mean, every time he got quiet, every time he took a breath, basically, there was heckling. And it
Yeah.
did not matter the emotional moment that they were interrupting.
There was this part that was actually after that story of the
Mhm.
daughter
Yep.
who died of, I assume, they weren't completely clear how she died, but presumably an overdose.
Mhm.
Fentanyl. And right into that, they started like jeering him, and they were, I think they would say, well, we're jeering him about the border where all the fentanyl's coming in. It's never been clear to me that's actually the case. I'm pretty sure most of it comes in by, smuggled in aircraft and stuff like that. But the point is, as you said, it was constant. And here's the thing: I was shocked the first time I was ever in the House chamber when you see it on TV, and this is for those of you who I assume is most of you who've never been there. When you see it on TV, it has the feeling of it's this, you know, big cavernous thing. And so when Marjorie Green is standing up and, like, you know, pumping her fist and yelling and stuff, that he's maybe like, "Oh, I could, you know, could I who is that out? I see someone."
Mhm.
It's not like that. It's really close. It's a small room. It's a small room. It looks much bigger on TV. So this is more like someone like 30, 40 feet away from you, just saying like, "You're lying, dude," whatever. So and that part of it, again, maybe it's just me, but on TV, it looks like it's all much bigger. It's not. So he sees exactly who's doing what, and, like, when he's going back and forth, he's not kinda going back and forth with the nameless crowd. He's certainly looking at one person, probably Marjorie Green, and saying like, "Oh, oh, am I alive?" You know, it's
Mhm.
very personal and intense, and
Yeah.
that is a very, you know, you've got 30, 40 million people watching you. It's it and it's not just kind of any time, it's consequential. So and that's highly unpredictable. You don't know how that's gonna go.
Right. And so, yeah, I think the big moment aside from him kind of using it to publicly negotiate was the fentanyl moment, as we say, because the camera at this point was mostly on the face of the grieving father when they're saying this is your fault, Biden, which is, kind of an echo of last year because one of the biggest moments there were when I think he was talking about burn pits or he was talking about dead soldiers. And I think then it
Right.
was Bobert who said again, oh, he said that X number of people are in coffins, right? And then Bobert said, you put them there. And that was last year's version of this. And
Yeah,
the
I
thing
mean,
is, like, I am sure, obviously, they wouldn't keep doing this if there wasn't an incentive to do it. And I am 100% sure there is some part of the base who loves it, who thinks it's freaky and hilarious that, like, there's no respect for the office, much less the man, But it's, they're not smart people. So they're doing it at to what a normal person would be this like very emotional, moving point, and then they're trying to get in with a little jab to be like, haha, it's your fault, like, meh, meh, interrupt your speech. And it's like
yeah,
that I think would work better if they maybe picked a point that was a little bit less devastating for those watching, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. No, that was a very hard for any parent, and you don't have to be a parent, but I can tell you as a parent that that's hard to watch. And I think what we see there is what a lot of commentators I hear saying a lot now, that the Republican Party largely exists in the sort of theatrical and moral economy of the right wing media ecosystem, where that kind of like, oh, they died, you did it, bro, good going.
Hmm.
Where most people are like, dude, and look, there's, a lot of people feel very strongly about issues dealing with immigration and the border and drugs and whatever, but there is a significantly smaller group who like that kind of stuff. That makes people feel uncomfortable. Even if you have some level of agreement with to the extent that you can find some policy agenda in there. Um and I think that's what in many ways, well, whether they were trying to do it, it's what they got. I think, to put it frankly, when normal people see that behavior, it's a little upsetting.
Yeah.
Most
I
people
mean,
don't. It's. I mean, and I'll say this. I'll say this, and I think most people don't agree with me here. It's becoming something a little more like prime minister's questions in the House of Commons, where you have guffaws and all, and it's a back and forth, and it's a kind of a combat. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that in itself. That is uh, that's its own thing. And but you can have that, I don't know, the liar, and it's very personal. It's again, they most Republican politicians, certainly the hardliners in the House, live within that right-wing media bubble where that stuff is awesome. But that's a bubble, and most people in the country aren't in that bubble, even if they're conservatives.
I mean, I think it's similar to how, you have all this Trump polling, right? That's like people love Trump, but they wish he would be like a little bit less of an ass. Like, I feel like that's pretty common even on the right. People who like his politics and that he's mean, but wish that he would cloak it in a more kind of genteel facade. And I
Yeah.
think this plays into it. This is the very definition of antisocial. Like, it makes people uncomfortable when you're at something with clearly defined parameters, like a very formal, big deal speech, and people are heckling. Like, even content aside, that makes people feel weird. It's like when you're sitting in a subway car and someone starts yelling. It's just those
Yeah.
that's not the
It's
social
uncomfortable.
contract we all agreed to,
It's uncomfortable. It's
Right.
uncomfortable. Yeah.
So, I mean, that was a huge part of the speech. And then also, I mean, the visual, right? You have Marjorie Taylor Greene being kind of the biggest mouthpiece for the hecklers. And she is wearing a jacket with a lush fur collar. I mean, the Cruella de Vil comparisons were just inevitable. That's not even clever. That's just what she looked like, you know?
Yeah, no, it was definitely, I didn't, that wasn't the association that I made. And everybody has their own sort of cinematic imagination. But what I went to, and I with my wife have, I haven't seen them in ages, but we used to watch various of the Housewives shows, that franchise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are a number of, kind of classic memes from that franchise. And there's the one with, I can't remember, I think it's Teresa from Real Housewives of New Jersey, where she says this thing that I can't even say on this show, that we can kind of use any words we want, and throws up, upends a table. And then there's this other one of this woman kind of being held back by one of her friends, saying, all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it reminded me of that,
Yep.
the kind of like thumbs down, yelling, and her look was not, it's not you know, a a, fe- a female friend of mine on Twitter said she looks like a mob girlfriend.
Yeah, she
And
did.
like, I'll let her say that, not me, but she did. It
Yeah.
had that look. It's like you're in Goodfellas or something. And
Which is
it's just
funny.
weird.
Be- and because she's clearly kind of positioning, well, what she fancies herself, right, is like the everyman who's like speaking truth to the elite, and then she decides to come shrouded in a fur. I mean, and it's you. So you have that visual, and then you have Kevin McCarthy, who clearly like kind of decided that his resting face was going to be kind of scornful, like that was the look. Um, but throughout, he was about a beat late on his reaction to every line. It was as if in real time he was like thinking it through and being like, can I clap for that, can I not clap for that, which I
When
think
he
was striking, because for some of the stuff he didn't clap for, I mean, it's some very innocuous stuff that he just stayed seated for. And then you have the juxtaposition of like, he won't clap for lowering insulin prices. And then when Biden mentions like a corporate tax, he's like, oh, no, 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 no.
But the thing that I saw was that his global plan was clearly, I'm not clapping at anything. I'm going to sit here and be stone faced. This is bullshit. But a lot of times, like towards the end, he kind of like, "Oh, yeah, okay." A
Mm-hmm.
few little claps. Like he couldn't quite pull it off, right? He couldn't quite he he couldn't quite be stone cold, right? He had to toss in some claps kind of at the end. And then in the second half of the speech, at least what I saw, like a lot of times he's like, dude, shut the fuck up. Shut up. I mean,
He
he
kept
wasn't saying that, but that was the body
he
language.
was doing these like half-hearted like shh to the crowd, to his members, which was such just a beautiful encapsulation of his like lack of power over this group, that he couldn't even really fully commit to like doing a forceful like, all right kids, settle down, and then it also was so rich because before the speech he'd been asked about how are your members going to behave, probably because Marjorie Taylor Greene was trotting around the hill with a helium balloon. And he said, oh, we've talked about this. Everyone's going to be good and civil and blah blah blah. And so then this happens, which then sets up the inevitable post game interview of, so that didn't happen, what went wrong, why don't you have control? And then he says some blather about, people are passionate, but it'd be wiser for us, not to take the bait, not to take Biden's bait. So then even when he's capping it off, he is publicly acknowledging that Biden came off the better of this interaction.
It's funny that what I was struck by, and I think this doesn't mean it was the greatest speech of all time, although again, I think as State of the Unions, it was one of the better or best I've seen. But one of the striking things is that, as you'd expect when you watch like network TV, MSNBC, CNN, Fox, obviously there's a range there, but kind of all of them, they're going to watch it and then they're going to say, oh, that was good, but that wasn't good. And, kind of all this kind of stuff. And I was watching on CNN and I was struck because they were sort of like, wow, he mopped the floor with those dudes.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were like, wow, he really, he hit it out of the park. And I think the key there is, I mean, I think they're right, but it was very unexpected. I think you prepare for a normal speech, um, and this was not a normal speech, and so I think because it's not what you'd expect, you get a little more of the unvarnished reaction, which is people saying, "Wow, he got the better of them there."
Mm-hmm.
And to the extent you think of Joe Biden as a guy who's a little creaky, a little slow, older, you don't expect him to get into kind of it certainly wasn't a shouting match on his side, but a sort of a verbal, let's take it outside kind of thing, and you don't expect him to get the better of it, right? And he did. And they kind of couldn't not acknowledge it.
And I think in some ways that was helped by how the White House set the stage for the speech, because they had, there's always these kind of press calls with administration officials before events like this where they basically, they give out teasers. They're like, here are a lot of the main themes of the speech. They're trying to preemptively spin the coverage. And this time, oh my God, so boring. I mean, everything out of that call was like, aggressively bipartisan, which is to be expected to some degree because this is his first State of the Union with a divided Congress. But it was like, and it was stuff that was in the speech, but it was cancer treatments and mental health solutions and helping veterans and stuff that is like, all good, not complaining about any of that, but it doesn't exactly get your blood rate up, right? I mean, it's just kind of boilerplate. This is still stuff that Republicans can't fight Democrats on, or can't fight them out loud anyway. So we all agree on this stuff. And that was kind of how the stage was set, that this was going to be kind of boring, kind of inoffensive. There's no real reason to kind of go really hard on Democratic priorities because the legislative ambition that could be contained in this speech had to be really narrowed just because of the congressional reality. And instead, he kind of goes in. And then the other thing is the White House has been going bananas on the cutting Medicare and Social Security thing. Like, we're getting an unusual amount of kind of on the record from the deputy press secretary statements. Like, those are coming in every day. The press secretary is talking about it at the briefings every day. The White House clearly sees this as a winning issue and are just trying to squeeze every drop out of it. And now the enduring moment, the clip that is probably as we speak being played on every cable show is the back and forth where Biden kind of manhandled the heckling Republicans on that very issue. So all of a sudden, the most salient piece that's going to get all of the post game coverage is this issue that's really bad for Republicans and that the White House desperately wants to talk about.
Yeah, and again, sort of with what you were saying about, kind of like negotiating from the podium, they have set up the at least the next several days, and I suspect the next several months about, well, you said you weren't you definitely said you're not cutting any social security in the when I gave the speech. I hope you're not going back on that. Can you reaffirm that you're definitely absolutely positively not and not and not? And it is their plan. It's not everybody's plan to sunset. That's a whole other, kind of idiotic idea Rick Scott came up with. But again, it's not like Rick Scott is like Jim Trafficant or something like that. Some like rando who no one's heard of. He was running the campaigns. He that was what everyone was supposed to run on. So and you get into stuff about what they want to do is, you can change the basically you can change the formulas that inflation is calculated by over time. So how, the rate at which benefits go up over time. You can shift the retirement. There are all these different kind of things you can do. But it is what they want to do. And they really just walked right into the trap. They
Right.
really and with what you were saying about, the moonshot and all this kind of stuff,
Mhm.
it definitely, that is a huge part of the intra-democratic party critique of Joe Biden. He's from a different era where
Mhm.
you can reach out and kind of appeal to the better nature of Republicans, and you can come together on something that both sides can agree on. And I think a lot of Democrats have the thought of, he's a great guy, but that's not how it works anymore. That's the past. You're gonna get chewed up. And as you say, they were certainly telegraphing it's going to be 100% that Joe Biden. He's going to be sort of like, uh, you know, negotiating against himself. His big program is going to be, let's cure cancer. And like, look, let's cure cancer, right? I mean, but we know that is not something, that is not a legislatable thing. That's a pretty tough one. We've been working on it for a while. And not getting into like, let's not bankrupt the country. Let's not do this hostage taking. Let's not but he did go there. And
Mhm.
I'm curious, the structure of the speech the structure of the speech was such that it's a little hard for me to imagine that that wasn't the plan, because they're going to be feral. That's what they do. They're not going to listen to McCarthy. So you start saying kind of like, and I hope we can agree that you're not going to do what some of those very, very, very few bad Republicans want to do, where you want to not pay the country's bills and have the whole world explode. I hope you're not going to do that, because wow, though we can all agree those very few Republicans are super bad. Of course they're going to wig out and start yelling and screaming and everything. And what you got is what you got.
I totally agree because the way the speech was structured, the first third or so was very kind of old school Democrat, right? There was a lot about manufacturing and bringing jobs back to America. And it was very kind of like blue collar, Rust Belt tea, all about the economy, all about job creation, all about economic stability. That was the whole first third. I mean, I was surprised at the time that the semiconductor chips bill got extremely high billing. I mean, multiple paragraphs way up high in the speech, whereas I'm not quite sure that a normal American off the street knows what that is. So that was kind of the first bit, very kind of Sherrod Brown. And then you get into the, by the way, they're going to explode the debt ceiling, cue all the heckling, cue the moment where Biden really kind of took control of the speech. And then the last third was very kind of democracy, right? I mean, that was really the notable part from that was when he gave the Paul Pelosi shout out, which was you saw Nancy Pelosi was visibly kind of tearing up, and then you saw Paul Pelosi sitting in the balcony wearing a hat to cover what we assume are the lingering wounds from getting attacked with a hammer in the skull. And that kind of punched home the, we're better together, house divided cannot stand, state of the union is strong stuff.
Well,
So
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think I partially think that's why the speech was so strong, is that the rhythm was really, really well done. And I think punctuated in a very effective way by the kind of quote unquote normal people spotlights, which, to be completely frank, I usually detest. Like, I think that they are often awkward looking. I think they're saccharine. I think it's sometimes just like, and this person is a good person, like, let's clap for the good and move on. But it, even from the very first one of those spotlights, which was the very cheerful union worker lady, it just worked really well. Like, she was telegenic and happy to be there, and that was kind of infectious. The Paul Pelosi one I thought was very affecting. The young couple at the end whose little girl had kidney cancer, and the story was kind of told in a way that it really, really seemed like she had died, and that was going to be the punchline. And then it ends with, and now she's 4 and she's watching from the White House. It just like really worked for me in a way that those usually do not at all.
Yeah, I mean, those are for all presidents. It's very easy to for them to slip into feeling very exploitative because
Exactly.
because it is political. You have people who have in many cases suffered profound losses that most of us can't even imagine. And they're up there. And again, it is political. I think we normally think, and I think it's basically right. They know how that works. They know that's part of the state. So they're not being blindsided by it. But it's a volatile thing in every case. I was struck on the Pelosi thing that he didn't just say, "Oh, and some terrible person who doesn't believe in our values." He basically said, "Yep, totally just like one of the insurrectionists, like about half of
Hmm.
you guys over here on the Republican support, and the big lie, which all of you support, and like look what happened. Paul got his head bashed in." So like that
I
they
loved
didn't
that.
he didn't hold back there. He was like very direct, kind of like your insurrection, your big lie. Look what ended up happening. And I think by that point, I think that was pretty late in the speech.
Yep.
Um, at that point, I, I don't know if the Republicans felt a little beat up or they just kind of felt a little cornered, but they just kind of had to take it, right?
Hmm.
They didn't say like, "Oh, Pelosi, I heard, going back to I heard you invited him,
Right.
all the kind of nonsense."
I totally also loved that line because he said the way he connected it to the insurrection was he described David DePape breaking into the house using the same language as the insurrectionists, which I thought was a brilliant way to tie them together because not only are those two things obviously related, but the language that they had in common was the insurrectionists going into the Capitol and being like, Nancy, where are you? I mean, in this horrific horror movie way of it's just everything in one little ball. It's calling her by her first name, right? It's not even respecting her enough to to use her last name like they would
Yeah.
with any man they were coming to get. And it's like they were headhunting her in particular. I thought it was so effective, and moving and just really well done. And there's two more parts of the speech that I specifically want to talk about before we wrap. One of which is Tyree Nichols' parents were there. The young black man that was just beaten brutally by a group of police officers, died of his injuries, and then all the horrific details come out, that he was screaming for his mother, and it just horrible. And the way I think I kind of had a mixed reaction to this section of the speech because police in particular is a place where Biden and Biden esque Democrats, I think, often do a lot of water carrying for Republicans to avoid the defund the police thing, which always feels to me, I get why they do it and I get why they feel like they have to do it, but Fox News is not going to stop saying that they're saying defund the police anyway, so I'm not sure what it serves other than making their supporters angry and making black people angry. And there was a bit of that. He said, we all feel the same about this issue, which is just, that's not true. Maybe say something else that feels a little more like Bondy than that. But he also had this section where he names all his children and he says, I never had to have the talk with them that brown and black parents do. And then kind of talked about hypothetical situations where what these children are told to do to avoid being hurt by the police, to avoid any kind of uh, looking like a threat in any way. Don't reach for your license. Don't turn on the interior car light. Put your hands where they can see them. And I found that powerful. I liked that he made it explicit that this is an experience that white people simply do not have.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think, it's that is, look, there are profound divisions in the country over that. That's just a reality. And I do think that, um, I think polling data, my very limited experience, y- you know, uh, African Americans have very conflicted and complex attitudes
Mm-hmm.
towards police. There is a huge amount of anger and fear about everything we know about police brutality, the killings, and they also want their neighborhoods to be safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why um, the defund the police thing has, it's certainly not that it has no resonance in the African American community, but it has limited resonance because you often, uh, many African Americans live in neighborhoods where there is crime, and often where there is, you have the aggressive, brutalizing policing, but certainly historically the case, you know, the police, public authority saying, there's a lot of crime over there, whatever. That's not a huge priority. We have to, keep crime down. And so it is a very complex thing. And I think, and I don't want to put myself in the place of speaking for anybody, but my perception is a lot of times, like, stop the brutality and also keep our neighborhood safe. You work
Mm-hmm.
for us. What the fuck? What is happening here? And that's but that is a that's there's obviously a lot of fissures in the Democratic Party about that, because the stuff that Biden was saying last night, which I basically agree with, his kind of looking at the whole picture, that whole sort of you know that kind of politics, that kind of rhetoric can certainly um, bleed into, it's a few bad apples. We're all on the same page here. The police, us, everything. Just a few guys who get, who get a little over the top and out of control. And that's, I think in any sophisticated way of thinking about these things, it's not the number of apples. We approach policing in a way that treats different races of people differently. We know about this. We all have our opinions about this. It's a difficult topic to keep everyone in a very diverse, and I mean that in the other sense of the word, diverse coalition together, in how they think about it. And I think he did a good, a good job of it there. Um, you know, Other people will tell.
I guess my sticking point here is I think the way that Republicans and the associated kind of right wing media ecosystem have weaponized defund the police has been incredibly effective. And I think Democrats, by and large, have done a pretty horrible job of combating it because they're doing the old standby of fighting on Fox News's ground, which is a losing proposition. I mean, it's the kind of thing where the whole Democratic Party has become tarred with a brush of defund the police, even though the idea stems from, activists on the left side of the spectrum. And that is their job. Their job is to try to pull the Democratic Party to the left to get their priorities done. And it's been allowed to kind of be to it's the same thing of when Republicans say critical race theory or whatever, and like then you kind of trace back where does that come from, and it's a group of like college kids at Oberlin or whatever, and all of a sudden that becomes the stance of the Democratic Party even though no elected officials are saying this kind of thing. And that seems to be the playing field that Democrats have to compete on, whereas for Republicans, whole swaths of whom are on the record saying that they want to cut Medicare and Social Security or end those programs altogether. Biden mentions it in the speech, and you got Mike Lee going, "What? I've never heard of such a notion," even though he's on film saying those things.
Well, the funny thing was in that, and I actually, maybe I'll post that video later. I pulled that down from our video system. He was sitting next to Rick Scott.
I know, I know
He
he
was sitting
was.
next to Rick Scott. So yeah, but I think, but this is also, this is the other side of of this coin, that, Democrats, I think, hey, we'd love to have a conversation with you to make sure there's none of you who are supporting cutting Social Security, because we seem to all agree now that would be totally terrible. So let's do a roll call and see if there are any of your people who say these terrible things, because in the same way, with policing, there it is in the nature of the structure of our politics that for many voters, Democrats don't have, if there is an argument about policing, Democrats lack some level of credibility, whether that is fair or accurate or not. And in the conversations about Medicare and Social Security, if there's a debate, people don't trust Republicans on that, because people know if there's anybody who wants to cut it, it's Republicans. People just know that's how it works. And I do think, the whole, I think there's some blame to go around with how the defund the police thing sort of got a head of steam, regardless of the fact that few, if any, elected Democrats supported it. There's kind of there's sort of two parts of that, or maybe you can say three. There's three parts of that politics. One is, I think, a very constructive argument about let's not have the let's not have a group of armed police go out when you have someone having a mental health crisis. You need to deal with that a different way. For the police, who that's not what they're trained for the person having a mental health crisis who is obviously not going to react in a predictable way. And so let's invest in, let's move some resources to these other things that also promote public safety, that are not kind of coming at everything with an armed response. That's
which
one
is
that's one part of it.
which is the possession I think Biden staked out last night when he
Yeah,
in his section about, we ask police officers to be too much, to do too much.
right. And there's another part of it which is sort of, I think some people kind of uh it's a rhetorical stance. When you see police officers who have done horrible things, things that are shocking to us as humans, defund the police. That's kind of, push back against the police. And then you have one group who disagrees with the basic concept that there should be municipal police forces. And that is a really unpopular idea. Very, some people think that. There are some interesting sociological theories that that undergird that, but I guarantee you, and kind of, the vast majority of people who say, like, let's just not have police, the vast majority of people of every race say that's crazy. And that's kind of what, and Democrats found themselves in that position where they kind of, Republicans were able to kind of leverage that against them, because I think to the vast majority of people, even who recognize all the structural problems with policing, inherent structural problems with policing, and the way that it is practiced in this country, still say, "Hey, I need someone to call if someone's breaking into my house." And if there's a and if there's an open air drug market next to the playground my kids play at, I need someone to call. So you can't get rid of the police. And Republicans have used that to great effect. Just, coming at something where the vast majority of people say, like, "Whoa, that's crazy. You guys believe that? That's totally nuts." And I can't, you're living in on a different planet if that's really what you believe in. It puts Democrats on the defensive.
So the other section of the speech I wanted to talk about was what came as the biggest surprise to me, which was the abortion section, which you could be forgiven if you missed it because it was literally 2 sentences long. He says, we need Congress to codify Roe, basically. He says, the vice president and I are doing all that we can on this issue. And if Republicans pass a national abortion ban, I will veto it.
Which
Which
clearly
was
isn't going to happen since the Senate isn't under control of the
exactly,
Democrats. Yeah.
which I thought was an interesting moment just because we saw none of the uproar from Republicans in reaction to the idea of a national abortion ban than we did to cutting Medicare and Social Security, which is a pretty clear signal of where they stand on it. But it was interesting because, again, the White House has been doing a lot of kind of abortion centric messaging. There have been a lot of kind of touting the various executive actions that Biden has taken. Recently, there's been a lot of talk around medical abortions and trying to keep mifepristone accessible and blah blah blah, and all this stuff has been in a very kind of limited stable, and some of that, abortion access advocates have criticized the administration for not trying to do enough. And then some say, well, limited set of tools. So, whatever mix is going on there, it's been something that I think the administration has largely seen as a powerful argument, especially coming off these midterms, where I think kind of the broad takeaway is that Dobbs really helped Democrats paint Republicans as extremists. And specifically, the court helped Democrats paint themselves as what is usually the argument of the minority party, which is you need us to rein in the excesses of the controlling entity, which was kind of a creative and surprising that it worked given that Democrats controlled the White House and all of Congress at the time.
A-
So
a-
I was surprised that it got such short shrift in the speech.
It's interesting. I mean, I think one of the big things about Dobbs, though, is that even though a lot of us have seen it coming and seen it becoming a reality, I think a lot of people realized you can have the Congress and the presidency, and it doesn't matter
Hmm.
because there's those six justices, and they can do anything they want, and they really don't give a shit what you think. And I think that was one of the powerful things. I wasn't sure totally what to make of it either because I have a good friend of mine is a very prominent uh, feminist writer and activist. And I saw her on social media this morning saying, like, what the fuck? Like, that is, I kind of, I didn't, the speech was a deep disappointment to her because, the sort of the central issue, which it is a central issue to lots of people,
Hmm.
as you said, it was kind of like, I don't know if it was two sentences, but I guess her point was it did not last a minute.
Definitely not.
It was less than a minute. And that is kind of strange. I don't know because and it's what makes it strange is that it's not like the it's not like the White House is like shied away from this.
Exactly.
They've been kind of all over it, and if anything, you've gotten uh, before the election, you got a lot of pushback, largely from the sort of populist left of the Democratic Party, but also some pollster types and stuff. Kind of, what I think is a wrong estimation of the politics, but basically those people saying, "Hey, stop only appealing to affluent white feminists talking about abortion. You're missing the big picture. You got to talk about jobs. You got to talk about wages and all this kind of stuff." Again, I'm not crediting the idea that it is only affluent white feminists who care about abortion rights, but that was the push. That's the kind of the dynamic within the Democratic Party, um, and so they were all over it. They were talking about it constantly. I mean, my beef was that they weren't connecting it to a post-election deliverable, saying, you need to elect us because we're going to pass this thing after, after the election. But in general, again, they the administration talks about this all the time. They're kind of all over it. So I don't. So in that sense, it doesn't. It be one thing if you could say, they don't really care about this issue. They don't think it works for them. But that's clearly not the case because they're on it all the time.
And it was the first State of the Union after Roe was overturned. I mean, that was a massive historical event. And I mean, it got much lower billing than semiconductor chips. I do find it kind of baffling, and I find it amid an otherwise extremely strong speech, almost like a just a purposeful kind of finger in the eye of a lot of the people who are in charge of delivering the strongest historical midterm for a Democratic president going in with these conditions. I thought it was kind of baffling.
Yeah, I don't exactly understand. The best explanation I can give is that, and you mentioned this earlier, that the um, everything in the speech, but particularly the first third of the speech, was aimed at people in mid-sized cities and towns, basically in post-industrial
Hmm.
Midwest, that kind of thing. The not having a job, the pride of having a job, the way that you can tell your family it's going to be. I mean, that was the kind of everything was aimed at that kind of that part of the contemporary American experience. And my best guess is they went into it thinking that's what we need to pull together here. That's the goal in this speech. And we need to do that and then kind of bait Republicans into saying, oh, we're going to cut your social security, all that kind of stuff. And I think that makes sense strategically, but there's no reason you can't have the overall focus on that and devote 5 minutes to abortion politics, right? It doesn't,
Mhm.
it's not one or the other. So
And I mean,
I don't
not
really
that it
get it either.
matters at this point, but you've got Supreme Court justices as a captive audience. I mean, I don't think that if Biden had gone harder on abortion, Brett Kavanaugh would have left the chamber and been like, change my mind. I'm changing my vote. We're bringing back abortion rights. But
Well, but
I mean, it's a stark visual at the very least.
what you did have is that you had that thing. I can't remember which State of the Union it was, but I think it was with Obama, and Obama said, kind of, yeah, Citizens United sucks.
Yeah.
And Alito was there like, oh, dude, no way. It doesn't suck. You suck. I mean, and that wouldn't have been a bad visual, having
Exactly.
Alito, kind of getting into a shouting match with Alito,
Yeah.
right? I can't imagine Alito would have sort of fallen into that. But yeah, I don't know exactly what the thinking was. It's possible they just didn't quite get how it's going to land. I mean, I think it is important to remember that there's all sorts of things going on in a State of the Union address, and there's all sorts of stakeholders trying to get their thing into it and stuff. And I do think it is possible. It's not an excuse, but you can kind of look back and think, "Ooh, how did we back into that? How did we
Hmm.
end up only having two sentences?" That's the best I can. Again, it's
Yeah.
not an excuse. It's how I think maybe you end up that way because, again, if it were the case that they want to soft pedal it, they don't want to get into it because they're afraid of the politics or they don't care about it, then they wouldn't be talking about it constantly the
Yeah.
rest of the time, which they
And
do.
I don't think it would have been that hard. Say, like, everything he said was right, but the thrust of it was just kind of like, well, now it's on Congress. I've done what I can do, which is like, even if that's kind of somewhat close to the political reality, pretty dispiriting. Not the best reelection message to be like, well, I'm powerless in this realm, so best of luck. I
Well,
think.
the part that landed sort of flat to me too was when he said that thing, and if Congress passes a national abortion ban, I will veto it. Well,
Mhm.
Congress isn't going to pass a national abortion ban. That's 100% not going to happen.
Right.
I don't even think the House would try, but if they did, it doesn't matter because the Senate. So like
Mhm.
it's not going to. So that is a notional non thing. If I had been writing that kind of speech, I would say something like, I've heard some of people in the
Mhm.
Republican Party might want to ban it. Let's do the opposite. Let's overrule Dobbs. So I challenge you to overrule Dobbs. Well, that's not going to happen either, but you can push people.
Yeah.
You can have that be kind of, and I think it will be a central issue in 2024
Right.
because you could very well end up with a Republican Congress and a Republican president, and then you can have it. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I don't. My friend was certainly quite upset about it, and I don't know why it happened that way.
Yeah. All right, so let's wrap up with kind of Biden's departure from the chamber. We'll finish the way he finished. So, Josh, you and I were discussing this a bit before we got on air, but we were watching the speech or most of the speech on different, media. I was watching the C-SPAN. You said you were watching CNN, right?
Yeah.
And I thought C-SPAN just overall during the speech, whatever the camera setup is, I thought it was great. The way that the camera would pan to the relevant people in the audience was kind of a super um the those decisions were clearly made by someone who is just neck deep in politics and knew exactly who was the person to pan to, whether it was Warnock on insulin prices or Cinema on raising corporate taxes, like it was spot on. And then when Biden kind of, oh, the state of our union is strong, God bless the troops, oh, clap, 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 and then he leaves the dais and he starts making his way and is just mobbed by House members who are trying to kind of get their second with the president on his way out of the chamber. And you know, Josh, you had hypothesized that he had left his mic on, which seems right to me because I could hear or nearly hear all the conversations he was having as he left. And obviously the camera's like right there in his face. And it was kind of nuts in it was almost Aaron Sorkin-esque to me in the way that all of these individual House members were coming up to him and saying things like, Mr. President, in the California 15th, we're dealing with a lot of drought issues, and I don't know where the food's going to come from if we can't help these farmers out. And then Biden would be like, gesture to his aide and have him take the person's number, or someone else coming up and say, I love that you said this in the speech, I want to help, let me know how I can help.
You
it,
know
it
what's
was
notable is
yeah.
I think the one you're referring to is this guy Lamalfa. That's actually a Republican member of Congress, which really struck me from
Mm,
California, from like an I mean, maybe there's another one who said the same. Maybe there's a Democrat who said the
mhm.
same thing, but the one I saw was this guy. I think his name's Lamalfa or Malfa. I can't remember. But it was interesting because he wasn't kind of saying like, "Oh, you suck. You took all the water." It was what members of Congress do. We need some help on this thing,
Mhm.
and it was striking, as a certain percentage of them were like, hey, here's my kid on FaceTime, say hi,
Yeah.
you know or let's do a selfie.
Mhm.
But a lot of it was, hey, I'm working on this thing, can you help? Or I want to, that. And it went on forever, and I'm pretty sure it's just like I said, they left him mic'd up. And I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if his kind of press handlers kind of thought, "Hey, this is great, man. Let's let everybody see this."
It was, and
Yeah.
there were kind of funny moments where I couldn't really hear what the congressman was saying, but Joe Biden was like, "Well, don't let the guy from West Virginia hear you." So it was clearly some kind of climatey thing.
Yeah.
And then right before he left the chamber, Debbie Dingle came over to
Oh
him
yeah.
to tell him that it was the anniversary of her husband John's death. And Biden's like, "Yeah, Bo's birthday was a few days ago. Uh, they're up there watching over us." I mean, it was very sweet and very what people like about Joe Biden, that other people want to come to him with their grief because they know that he understands. I mean,
Yeah.
if your thought about, the press people letting it happen, that just would not surprise me at all because the kind of interpersonal Joe is what everyone has always said. That's him at his best, his
Yeah.
most human, his most kind of compassionate commander in chief type thing.
If for listeners, if you did not see this stuff, there is a reporter, Jen Bendery, who's been at Huffington Post, I think, since the beginning, and still is. She's one of their top politics reporters. She did a thread on Twitter last night, and the first part of the thread is just as many reporters do, just kind of going through things in the speech. But about halfway through that thread, it gets to the end of the speech, and she does, I don't know, like 20 tweets of pictures of these different encounters. And it's sort of, so it gives you a feel for it. Like if you're interested, again, I guess her full name that you would look her up in, Jennifer Bendery, Bendery, from HuffPost. And so she has this, and you kind of, if you go through this thread, you kind of get a feel for it. Because I don't know how, I ended up switching to C-SPAN like in the middle of the speech, because I realized that C-SPAN was getting a lot more of the reaction shots. I guess because they're using their own cameras and the networks don't access their cameras. I have no idea. But yeah, that was you know, press people are usually pretty sharp. They know something's good when it's good, and certainly, I don't know, in every State of the Union I've ever seen, the president walks back up that aisle. Everybody's kind of clamoring. He says hi to a few people, gives a hug, takes a selfie, and that's it. Like it's 3 or 4 minutes, five tops. And it may not have been an hour, but it was a long time. It was, a lot of people are saying it's like he's closing the bar, right? He's
Mhm.
gonna be the last one out. Um, So yeah, that was that was whatever you think about Joe Biden's presidency, his policy views, and so forth. That's sort of the best part of him, and it was nice to see that. So I think that's about all we got, isn't it?
The State of the Union is strong.
Yeah, Save Union Strong, and it's given us a strong episode because there's lots to talk about. Let me remind you that the Josh Marshall podcast is brought to you by Grady's Cold Brew Iced Coffee. You can get 25% off every order if you use the promo code TPM, and they are at Grady'sColdBrew.com. And
All right.
that's it.
See you next
Later.
week. The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.